The cruelest downfall never begins with shouting. It begins the moment a man believes the woman he discarded will never rise again. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The wedding invitation arrived on a Wednesday morning, folded neatly between a gas bill and a grocery coupon inside Claire Whitmore's tiny apartment mailbox in Brooklyn. The envelope itself felt expensive. Thick cream paper, gold lettering. The kind of invitation meant to be displayed on marble countertops beside crystal champagne glasses. Claire stared at Nathaniel Mercer's name for several seconds before opening it. Outside her apartment window, rainwater slid slowly down the fire escape, while distant sirens echoed somewhere across the avenue. She stood barefoot on cold hardwood floors wearing an oversized gray sweater with paint marks on the sleeves from the design studio, where she now worked 6 days a week. 3 years ago, she used to wake up inside a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Now she measured grocery budgets with a calculator taped to her refrigerator. Yet somehow, the invitation still made her smile. Not because she was happy for him, but because she suddenly understood something terrifying about people like Nate Mercer. They never invited you back because they missed you. They invited you to witness their victory. The ceremony would take place at the Astoria Crown Hotel in Manhattan, one of those places where politicians, athletes, and hedge fund executives disappeared behind velvet curtains and camera flashes. Claire almost declined. Almost. But at exactly 8:14 that night, another message arrived. A text from Nate himself. Hope you've healed enough to attend. She read it twice, then placed the phone face down beside a cup of cold coffee. The ballroom shimmered like liquid gold on the night of the wedding. Chandeliers hung overhead like frozen fireworks, while a string quartet played near towering white orchids flown in from California that morning. Women in silk gowns floated across the marble floor, holding champagne flutes worth more than Claire's weekly paycheck. Men laughed too loudly near the open bar, adjusting watches that caught the light every time they raised a hand. Claire arrived alone. Simple black dress. No diamonds. No dramatic entrance. Just quiet elegance wrapped in calm shoulders and controlled breathing. A few conversations softened when people recognized her. Others stopped completely. She noticed the looks immediately. Pity from some. Curiosity from others. One woman whispered something behind her champagne glass before glancing toward Claire's shoes. Another guest awkwardly smiled and said, "You look good," in the same tone people used at funerals. Then Claire saw him. Nate Mercer stood near the stage in a tailored tuxedo, one hand resting confidently around Vanessa Hale's waist. Vanessa looked exactly like the kind of woman magazines described as effortless beauty. Younger than Claire. Platinum blonde hair. Sharp white smile. A social media celebrity whose entire life seemed filtered through luxury vacations and sponsored jewelry posts. Nate laughed loudly at something one of his partners said, but the second his eyes found Claire across the ballroom, his expression shifted almost invisibly. Satisfaction. That was the word. Satisfaction mixed with relief, as if seeing her smaller than before completed something inside him. A wedding coordinator approached Claire with a polite smile and guided her toward the back of the ballroom. Table 17. Beside two elderly strangers, and directly near the kitchen doors where servers carried trays of lobster and steak beneath harsh fluorescent lighting. Claire slowly pulled out her chair without complaint. From the stage, Nate lifted his champagne glass and tapped it gently with a silver spoon. The ballroom quieted instantly. Then he smiled toward the crowd and said, "Tonight is proof that life sometimes gives us a second chance at choosing the right future." Laughter spread softly across the room. Claire lowered her eyes toward the untouched glass in front of her. But before she could reach for it, someone stopped beside her table and quietly asked, "Is this seat taken?" Claire slowly looked up from the untouched champagne glass as the stranger beside her adjusted the empty chair across from table 17. He appeared to be somewhere in his early 60s, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark charcoal suit with no visible designer logos and a simple black tie. There was something unusually calm about him, especially compared to the restless energy filling the ballroom. Claire noticed immediately that he did not look at her with pity. He simply waited. No, she answered softly. It is not taken. The man nodded once before sitting down with quiet elegance, as though he had spent his life entering rooms without needing permission. Around them, servers moved quickly beneath bright kitchen lights, carrying trays of filet mignon and roasted sea bass, while laughter echoed from the center tables, where Nate's law partners entertained investors and clients. Claire could feel the separation clearly now. The important people sat near the dance floor beneath warm chandelier light. The forgotten ones sat near swinging metal kitchen doors that opened every 30 seconds with bursts of noise and steam. A waiter accidentally brushed Claire's shoulder while rushing past with wine glasses. He apologized quickly without stopping. Across the ballroom, Vanessa leaned close to Nate and whispered something into his ear while glancing toward table 17. Both of them smiled. Claire lowered her gaze again. The older man beside her noticed everything. "You know the groom?" he asked. Claire gave a restrained smile that barely reached her eyes. "I used to." Before he could respond, another woman approached the table. Claire recognized her instantly. Rebecca Collins, one of Nate's former co-workers. Rebecca had once spent entire weekends inside Claire and Nate's penthouse drinking expensive wine and talking about vacation homes in Vermont. Tonight, she looked uncomfortable even standing there. "Claire," Rebecca said carefully, "I did not know if you were actually coming." "Neither did I," Claire answered honestly. Rebecca forced a small laugh, then glanced awkwardly toward the stage. "Well, Nate seems happy." The sentence landed exactly the way Claire expected it would. Not cruel enough to criticize, not kind enough to comfort. Just another reminder that people became careful around women after divorce, as though heartbreak might somehow spread through conversation. Claire nodded politely. "I hope he is." Rebecca looked relieved by the answer, like she had feared a dramatic scene and was grateful not to find one. "You always handled things with grace," she said softly. Then, after a hesitation that revealed more truth than the sentence itself, she added, "Not everyone would have." Claire almost smiled at that, because grace was often just another word people used when a woman stayed quiet while being humiliated. From the stage, Nate continued greeting guests like a politician working a ballroom. Firm handshakes, perfect smile, effortless confidence. Every few minutes his eyes drifted back toward Claire's table, checking her expression the way gamblers checked roulette wheels. He wanted confirmation that she still hurt, that his new life looked brighter from where she sat. The older man beside Claire calmly sipped water. "Your silence seems to disappoint him," he observed quietly. Claire finally looked at him fully. "Excuse me. Men like that prefer visible damage," he said. "It helps them feel justified." Before Claire could answer, Vanessa suddenly appeared beside the table wrapped in a white satin gown that shimmered beneath the ballroom lights. Her perfume arrived seconds before her voice did. "Expensive, sharp, deliberate." "Claire," Vanessa said brightly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I am so glad you made it tonight." Claire stood politely. "Congratulations." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, studying Claire's simple black dress. "You look very elegant, minimalist." The compliment carried just enough sweetness to feel insulting. Nearby guests began listening now without pretending otherwise. Claire could feel their curiosity gathering like static in the air. Vanessa smiled wider. "Nathaniel was worried this might be difficult for you emotionally." Claire kept her posture steady. That was thoughtful of him. For a split second, Vanessa's smile weakened. She had expected discomfort. Maybe tears. Maybe bitterness. But Claire's calmness unsettled her more than anger would have. Then Nate himself approached the table, champagne glass in hand, confidence glowing from his tailored tuxedo. "Everything all right here?" he asked casually, though his attention stayed fixed on Claire. "Perfect," Vanessa answered before Claire could speak. Then she slipped her arm through Nate's and looked directly at Claire with polished cruelty hidden behind perfect manners. "Actually," Vanessa said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear, "Nathaniel and I were just about to invite you to say a few words during the reception. After all, you knew him before any of us did." For a moment, the ballroom became unnaturally quiet. Even the string quartet near the stage seemed softer as dozens of eyes slowly turned toward Claire Whitmore, standing beside table 17. The kitchen door swung open behind her with bursts of heat and noise, but out in the ballroom itself, silence spread like perfume through the crowd. Vanessa Hale smiled beautifully while waiting for Claire to answer, her manicured fingers still wrapped around Nate Mercer's arm. Nate lifted his champagne glass halfway, watching carefully. He looked almost relaxed now, as though this was the moment he had truly been waiting for all night. Claire understood immediately what they were doing. This was never an invitation. It was a performance, and she had just been handed a role inside it. Rebecca Collins shifted uncomfortably near the table, clearly regretting that she had stayed long enough to witness this. Several nearby guests exchanged glances that carried the same silent question. Would the ex-wife embarrass herself? Claire kept her posture composed despite the sudden pressure tightening around her from every direction. I do not think tonight should be about the past, she answered gently. Vanessa laughed softly, not cruel enough to appear rude, just polished enough to earn approval from the surrounding guests. Oh, come on, she said brightly. You were part of Nathaniel's life for years. It would actually mean a lot. A few people nearby nodded immediately, sensing entertainment disguised as kindness. One man at the adjacent table muttered under his breath, "This should be interesting." Claire noticed Nate glance toward the ballroom stage where a microphone rested beside towering white roses and crystal candle holders. He looked confident again now, comfortable. The older man seated beside Claire remained silent through all of it, though his expression had sharpened slightly. He studied Nate with the detached calm of someone evaluating a business negotiation rather than a wedding reception. Claire finally looked directly at Nate. You really want me to speak? Nate smiled slowly. Why would I not? The answer sounded smooth, but his eyes carried something colder underneath. Challenge. The same challenge he used to wear during arguments inside their old penthouse whenever he wanted to win instead of understand. Claire remembered those nights clearly now. Nate standing near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan while telling her she was too emotional or too sensitive anytime she questioned his growing distance. She remembered eating dinner alone while he stayed out entertaining clients. Remembered discovering photographs of Vanessa online months before the divorce papers arrived. Yet somehow, standing inside this ballroom tonight hurt less than she once imagined it would. Maybe because grief eventually exhausted itself. Or maybe because humiliation repeated too many times eventually turned into clarity. Vanessa lightly touched Nate's chest and smiled toward the guests. See? This is what maturity looks like, she announced loudly. Not everyone can stay friends after divorce. The statement drew approving laughter from several tables closer to the stage. Claire noticed one older woman studying her with open sympathy now, while two younger guests openly scanned her dress and handbag with subtle judgment. People always measured women after divorce. The successful ones glowed publicly beside richer men. The unsuccessful ones sat near kitchen doors pretending not to notice. A waiter approached with another tray of champagne. As Claire reached politely for a glass, the older man beside her quietly placed a folded black card near her hand beneath the tablecloth where no one else could see it. She glanced down briefly. The card was thick matte black with silver lettering pressed into the surface. Cross Capital Partners. No phone number. No title. Just a name embossed at the bottom. Julian Cross. Claire frowned slightly before looking back at him, but he simply lifted his water glass calmly as though nothing unusual had happened. Then, from the stage, Nate suddenly tapped his spoon against his champagne glass once more. Actually, he announced with a charming smile, I think Claire deserves a proper spotlight tonight. A few guests clapped politely before they even understood what was happening. Vanessa stepped aside gracefully as Nate extended his hand toward the ballroom stage. Come up here, he said warmly, though his eyes held something sharp beneath the smile. Tell everyone how proud you are that we both finally found the lives we were meant to have. Every chandelier in the ballroom seemed brighter the moment Claire Whitmore realized there was no graceful way out of what Nate Mercer had just done. He was not inviting her onto the stage to honor the past. He was placing her beneath a spotlight so everyone could measure what she had become after losing him. Around the ballroom, guests leaned subtly closer in their seats. Crystal glasses reflected warm gold light across polished tables, while the string quartet continued playing softly near the dance floor as though humiliation belonged naturally beside champagne and wedding cake. Nate stood at the center of it all with perfect posture and effortless confidence, one hand extended toward the stage. Vanessa remained beside him smiling serenely, though satisfaction flickered visibly behind her eyes now. Claire slowly rose from her chair. The movement alone caused nearby conversations to disappear completely. Rebecca Collins looked horrified. The older woman from the neighboring table lowered her gaze sympathetically into her wine glass. Even the waitstaff seemed aware that something uncomfortable was unfolding. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes studying her black dress, her simple jewelry, the absence of diamonds on her hands now. Nate watched carefully, waiting for emotion to crack through her calm expression, waiting for proof that he still had power over her. The older man seated beside Claire remained silent, but as she stepped away from table 17, he quietly slid the black cross capital card closer toward her place, setting, as though leaving behind evidence that this moment mattered more than anyone realized yet. Claire walked slowly toward the stage across marble floors that reflected the ballroom lights beneath her heels. She remembered crossing floors like this years ago beside Nate, while photographers called their names outside charity galas and corporate events. Back then, people admired her because she belonged to him. Tonight, they admired her survival almost the same way people admired expensive art damaged by fire. Beautiful because it endured destruction. Nate greeted her halfway to the stage with polished warmth. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly enough for only her to hear. Claire looked at him calmly. "You already knew I would not refuse publicly." Something shifted in his expression for half a second. Not guilt, irritation, because even now, she understood him too clearly. Nate guided her toward the microphone while guests watched with growing anticipation. Vanessa followed several feet behind, glowing beneath the ballroom lights in white satin and diamonds. Claire suddenly noticed how hard Vanessa was trying to appear victorious. Constant smiling, constant touching, constant performance. Truly happy people rarely worked that hard to prove it. Nate handed Claire the microphone. It felt cold in her hand. For several long seconds, she said nothing. The silence itself became unbearable. Somewhere near the back, silverware lightly struck a plate. Someone coughed nervously. Nate smiled toward the audience as though rescuing the situation. "Claire and I shared many years together," he announced smoothly. "And I think it is important to celebrate growth, maturity, and new beginnings." A few guests clapped politely again. Claire finally lifted her eyes toward the crowd. She saw curiosity, judgment, pity, entertainment, all mixed together beneath crystal chandeliers and expensive perfume. Then she spoke softly. "Sometimes people do not invite you into a room because they value your presence." The ballroom quieted instantly. Nate's smile weakened almost invisibly. Claire continued calmly, her voice steady and elegant. "Sometimes they invite you because they want proof you did not survive without them." Complete silence now. Even Vanessa stopped smiling. Claire lowered the microphone slightly. "But healing quietly confuses people who expected destruction." Somewhere near the front tables, one man shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Rebecca Collins stared at Claire with widening eyes, as though finally recognizing the cruelty hidden beneath tonight's performance. Nate stepped closer quickly, still smiling for appearances though tension had entered his jaw. "I think maybe this is becoming a little emotional," he interrupted lightly. "Perhaps tonight should stay focused on celebration." Claire handed him back the microphone without resistance. "Of course," she answered gently. Then, before she could step away, Vanessa suddenly moved beside Nate and spoke into the microphone with a polished laugh that cut sharper than shouting ever could. "Actually," Vanessa announced brightly to the ballroom, "I think maybe Claire would feel more comfortable leaving early before things become awkward for everyone." The silence that followed felt heavier than humiliation itself. Claire stood alone beneath the ballroom lights while no one at any table moved to defend her. Then, with remarkable calm, she simply reached for her coat near the stage stairs and said quietly, "Do not worry. I learned a long time ago how to leave places where I am no longer welcome." The ballroom remained silent for exactly 3 seconds after Claire Whitmore spoke those words. 3 quiet seconds beneath crystal chandeliers and gold light where nobody moved, nobody laughed, and nobody dared interrupt the dignity of a woman leaving with more grace than the people who had tried to humiliate her. Then conversation slowly returned in scattered whispers as Claire stepped away from the stage holding her black wool coat carefully over one arm. She did not rush. That was what unsettled Nate Mercer the most. He had expected tears, anger, maybe even humiliation visible enough to justify the cruelty of tonight. Instead, She walked through the ballroom with calm shoulders and steady breathing, as though losing him years ago had already taught her how to survive rooms like this. Vanessa Hale leaned closer toward Nate once Claire descended the stage stairs. "You should not feel bad," she whispered quietly, though satisfaction still lingered beneath her polished voice. She was making people uncomfortable. Nate nodded automatically, but his attention remained fixed on Claire moving toward the ballroom exit. Something about the way she carried herself no longer matched the version of her he had constructed in his mind after the divorce. Broken women usually looked smaller. Claire somehow looked untouchable. Near the entrance, Rebecca Collins hurried after her in silver heels that clicked sharply against the marble floor. "Claire, wait." Claire paused beside enormous glass windows overlooking rain-soaked Manhattan streets 30 floors below. Yellow taxi lights blurred through the storm outside, like moving watercolor beneath the city skyline. Rebecca finally reached her, breathing unevenly. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "That should never have happened." Claire gave a small, tired smile. "You do not need to apologize for other people." Rebecca looked back nervously toward the ballroom where guests had already resumed drinking and laughing beneath warm music. "Nathaniel was not always like this," she said softly. Claire stared through the rain-covered glass for several seconds before answering. "Actually, he was. We just called it ambition back then." Rebecca lowered her eyes. The truth of that sentence landed heavily between them. Claire slipped one arm slowly into her coat sleeve. The black cross capital card remained tucked quietly in her hand now, its matte edges warm from her fingers. She still did not fully understand why the older man had given it to her. Julian Cross. The name meant nothing to her yet, but something about the gesture felt intentional, almost protective. Rebecca hesitated before speaking again. "Why did you even come tonight?" Claire finally looked at her fully. Outside, the storm continued washing silver rain across Manhattan glass towers, while distant thunder rolled softly above the city. "Because this date mattered to me long before it became their wedding day," Claire answered quietly. Rebecca frowned slightly. Claire's voice softened further. 10 years ago tonight, Nate proposed to me under the old lights at Riverside Park." She smiled faintly at the memory despite everything. "He told me we would spend the rest of our lives choosing each other every day." Rebecca's expression fell completely. Claire continued calmly, without bitterness. "I almost stayed home tonight, but part of me needed to see whether that memory still hurt." "And does it?" Rebecca asked gently. Claire looked back toward the ballroom doors where music and laughter leaked faintly into the hallway. "No," she answered after a long pause. "That is what surprised me." Rebecca's eyes filled briefly with emotion she tried hard to hide. Claire noticed immediately and reached for her hand reassuringly. "Do not let tonight change the kind parts of you," Claire said softly. "People become cruel when they are afraid of looking small. That has nothing to do with us." Rebecca nodded silently. For the first time all evening, someone looked at Claire not with pity, but with admiration. Then suddenly, the atmosphere inside the hotel shifted. It began subtly at first. 2 valet attendants near the entrance straightened immediately. A hotel manager hurried quickly across the lobby, adjusting his suit jacket. Several security staff exchanged nervous glances while guests near the ballroom doors turned instinctively toward the front entrance. Outside the towering glass windows, headlights cut through the rain before a long black car slowly pulled beneath the hotel awning. The engine quieted into silence. Then came the sound of polished dress shoes stepping onto wet pavement. The sound of the car door closing outside the Astoria Crown Hotel changed the energy of the lobby almost instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet authority that only certain people carried without effort. Claire Whitmore noticed it immediately in the way the hotel staff straightened their posture and the valet attendants suddenly stopped talking. Even the wedding guests lingering near the ballroom entrance turned subtly toward the glass doors as though reacting to a shift in air pressure before a storm. Rain slid across the enormous front windows in silver streaks while Manhattan traffic glowed beneath the wet night streets outside. Then the hotel doors opened. Julian Cross stepped inside without security, without photographers, without the exaggerated performance wealthy men often preferred. He wore a dark navy overcoat over a charcoal suit tailored with almost invisible precision. No flashy watch. No visible logos. Just quiet elegance and the kind of composure that made everyone else look slightly overdressed around him. Claire froze for half a second the moment she recognized him. The older man from table 17. Only now, under the bright lobby lights, she saw what she had missed earlier. People were not reacting to his money alone. They were reacting to his presence. A senior hotel manager crossed the marble floor immediately with visible nervousness. "Mr. Cross," he said carefully, "we were not informed you would be arriving tonight." Julian removed one black leather glove slowly before shaking the manager's hand. "Neither was I." His voice remained calm and low, yet every nearby conversation faded instinctively around it. Rebecca Collins stared openly now, confusion spreading across her face. "Wait," she whispered toward Claire. "That is Julian Cross." Claire looked down briefly at the matte black business card still resting in her hand. Suddenly, the name meant something. Cross Capital Partners, one of the largest private investment firms in the country. The same company Nate Mercer had spent the last 6 months desperately trying to secure as a client according to every legal industry article Claire had accidentally seen online. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere had already shifted without anyone fully understanding why. Nate stood near the stage speaking with 2 investors when one of them abruptly stopped listening and looked toward the entrance. Then another guest noticed. Then another. A ripple of recognition moved quietly through the ballroom beneath the music and crystal light. Vanessa smiled uncertainly at first, assuming another wealthy guest had arrived. But Nate's expression changed too quickly for her not to notice. His confidence disappeared in pieces. First confusion, then disbelief, then something much worse. Fear. Claire watched him from across the lobby as realization spread across his face. Julian Cross was not supposed to know she existed. He was certainly not supposed to arrive moments after she had been publicly humiliated and asked to leave. Julian's eyes finally found Claire standing near the windows in her black dress and wool coat. Unlike everyone else tonight, he did not look at her with curiosity or pity. He looked at her as though he had expected to find her standing exactly there. Calm, alone, dignified. He walked toward her across polished marble floors while conversations lowered around him into near silence. Several guests moved subtly out of his path without being asked. Nate immediately excused himself from his group and hurried forward with the practiced smile of a man trying to recover control before anyone noticed he had lost it. "Mr. Cross," Nate said quickly, extending his hand. "What an incredible surprise. I had no idea you would be joining us tonight." Julian stopped walking. His eyes shifted slowly from Nate's outstretched hand to Claire standing quietly near the window. Then back again. He did not shake Nate's hand. The silence that followed felt sharper than humiliation. Vanessa's smile faded completely now. Nearby guests exchanged confused glances while hotel staff pretended not to stare. Nate lowered his hand awkwardly, color slowly leaving his face beneath the ballroom lights. Julian finally spoke in the same calm voice that somehow carried across the entire entrance hall without effort. "Interesting," he said quietly. "You seemed much more welcoming before you realized who I was." The silence after Julian Cross refused Nate Mercer's handshake spread through the ballroom like cold air moving beneath a closed door. Nobody spoke immediately because nobody understood how to react fast enough. Moments earlier, Nate had been the center of the room, the successful attorney, the groom, the man who appeared to have won everything. Now he stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers with his hands slowly lowering back toward his side, while guests exchanged uncertain glances around half-finished champagne glasses. Claire Whitmore remained near the rain-covered windows, holding her coat quietly against herself. She noticed the exact moment people stopped seeing her as the unfortunate ex-wife at table 17. It happened subtly, in the way investors suddenly looked at her with curiosity instead of pity, in the way hotel staff glanced toward her before speaking to Julian, in the way Vanessa Hale's confidence began slipping behind forced smiles and tightened posture. Nate recovered first, though barely. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said carefully, attempting another polished smile. "We were honored to have representatives from Cross Capital attend tonight." Julian looked at him calmly. Representatives were never attending. The sentence landed heavily. Several attorneys near the ballroom bar exchanged immediate looks of concern. Everyone in Nate's professional circle knew what Cross Capital represented. Billion-dollar acquisitions, corporate restructures, careers made or destroyed inside quiet conference rooms overlooking Manhattan. Nate swallowed visibly before speaking again. Mr. Cross, perhaps we could discuss business another time. Business, Julian repeated softly. Then his eyes shifted briefly toward Claire. Interesting choice of word considering how personally your evening seems arranged. Vanessa stepped forward quickly, laughing lightly as though charm alone could smooth over discomfort. I think everyone may be reading too deeply into things, she said brightly. Tonight is supposed to be joyful. But nobody was listening to Vanessa anymore. Rebecca Collins finally found the courage to speak. Actually, she said quietly from near the entrance, Claire never caused any trouble tonight. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued anyway. She was respectful the entire time. The ballroom turned toward her now. Rebecca took a breath before looking directly at Nate. You invited her here knowing exactly what people would think. That was not kindness. Nate's jaw tightened instantly. Rebecca, this is not your concern. No, Rebecca answered softly. It should have been yours. The room fell silent again. Claire could almost feel the atmosphere changing around her completely now. Not because she had defended herself loudly, but because someone else finally admitted the truth out loud. Julian remained still beside the entrance, one hand resting lightly against the handle of his umbrella while rainwater glimmered across the hotel windows behind him. You know, he said calmly, I spent the last 6 months reviewing every proposal submitted to Cross Capital for the Mercer acquisition case. Nate's face lost color. Vanessa looked confused now, clearly unaware of what that sentence meant. Julian continued evenly. Most firms presented numbers, contracts, forecasts. He glanced briefly toward Claire again. Only one proposal included handwritten notes in the margins explaining how layoffs would affect employees with children. Several guests frowned in confusion. Nate said nothing. Claire looked down slightly as realization slowly spread through the room. Julian's voice remained calm. Those notes were not written by you, Mr. Mercer. Nate looked trapped now. Claire used to help organize some early drafts years ago, he admitted stiffly. It was nothing formal. Rebecca stared openly at Claire. Other attorneys nearby suddenly remembered details they had overlooked for years. The charity events Nate never planned himself. The employee support programs Claire quietly designed during their marriage. The mentorship dinners she hosted for junior staff, while Nate collected public credit. Julian's gaze settled fully on Claire now. Compassion is very rare in corporate law, he said. I remember the people who still possess it. Vanessa slowly stepped backward beside Nate, as though instinctively distancing herself from the collapse unfolding around them. The ballroom no longer looked at Claire with sympathy. They looked at her with something far more unsettling for people like Nate Mercer. Respect. Claire finally spoke softly into the silence. Please do not destroy his career over tonight. That sentence shocked the room more than anything else had. Julian studied her carefully. After what happened here, Claire nodded once. Humiliation teaches people enough without needing ruin. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Julian looked at Nate one final time and said quietly, You spent years standing beside greatness and only recognized it after you lost access to it. No one in the ballroom spoke for several long seconds after Julian Cross finished his sentence. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable now. It felt deserved. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above the reception tables, while rain continued sliding down the towering hotel windows behind Claire Whitmore. Somewhere near the stage, the string quartet had stopped playing entirely. Nate Mercer stood motionless beneath the warm ballroom lights, staring at Claire as though seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Not as an extension of his success. Not as the woman who once waited alone inside expensive apartments while he built his reputation, but as the quiet force behind so much of what people once admired about him. Vanessa Hale slowly removed her hand from Nate's arm. The movement was small, almost invisible, but people noticed. They noticed everything now. Rebecca Collins stepped closer toward Claire with genuine respect, replacing the guilt in her expression. Several younger associates from Nate's firm looked openly stunned as pieces of old conversations suddenly made sense in their minds. The mentorship dinners, the employee wellness initiatives, the anonymous tuition assistance fund created years ago for interns struggling to afford law school textbooks. Everyone had always assumed Nate organized those programs for publicity. Claire never corrected them. Julian finally broke the silence. Cross Capital will still move forward with restructuring discussions, he said calmly. Nate lifted his eyes immediately, desperate relief flashing briefly across his face. But Julian continued before he could speak. However, leadership recommendations have changed. The sentence landed softly but carried enormous weight. Several corporate partners near the bar exchanged immediate looks. Nate understood exactly what it meant. Not public destruction. Not scandal. Something worse for a man like him. Lost trust. Lost influence. Lost certainty about his future inside rooms, where reputation mattered more than talent. Claire saw the realization settle slowly across his face. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely human instead of polished. Tired. Hollow. Afraid. Vanessa quietly stepped farther away now, distracted by guests suddenly avoiding eye contact with her. Earlier that night, she had been the center of admiration. Now the room had shifted around her completely. The attention she once enjoyed no longer felt warm. It felt judgmental. Claire could have said something cruel then. She could have exposed every private wound Nate caused during their marriage. Every lonely anniversary dinner. Every humiliating lie. Every moment she quietly disappeared so his ambition could shine brighter. Instead, she simply looked toward Rebecca. You still mentor junior associates, right? Rebecca blinked in surprise. Yes. Claire nodded once. Keep doing it. People remember who helped them when nobody else did. Rebecca's eyes filled again, though this time not from pity. From gratitude. Julian watched Claire carefully throughout the exchange, his expression unreadable beneath the ballroom lights. You protect people who do not deserve protection, he observed quietly. Claire folded her coat gently over one arm. No, she answered softly. I just know what bitterness does to people when they carry it too long. Nearby guests lowered their eyes almost instinctively, because suddenly the woman they once dismissed at table 17 seemed far richer than anyone in the room. Not financially, spiritually, emotionally, the kind of wealth that could not be rented for a wedding or purchased with status. One of the hotel managers approached nervously holding a folder against his chest. Mr. Cross, he said carefully, the board members for tomorrow's foundation dinner have arrived early. They are asking for Ms. Whitmore specifically regarding the urban housing project proposal. Nate stared at Claire in confusion. Rebecca looked equally shocked. The manager quickly clarified. Ms. Whitmore has been consulting on affordable residential redesign projects across Brooklyn for almost a year now. Claire looked mildly embarrassed by the attention. Small projects, she said quietly. But the manager smiled respectfully. Actually, several neighborhoods were approved for redevelopment because of your recommendations. The room shifted again. Guests who once measured Claire by her divorce now realized she had been quietly rebuilding entire communities while they were busy gossiping about her failure. Nate lowered his eyes slowly. Everything he once dismissed as softness had somehow become substance. Everything he mocked as emotional had become meaningful. Claire moved toward the entrance at last while guests instinctively stepped aside to let her pass. Nobody looked at her with pity anymore. They looked at her the way people looked at someone who had survived fire without losing kindness. Just before she reached the hotel doors, Nate finally spoke behind her, his voice quieter than it had been all night. I thought success meant finding someone better. Claire paused briefly beneath the golden lobby lights, but did not turn around. Then she answered with calm honesty that cut deeper than humiliation ever could. No, Nate. Success was never about replacing people. It was about appreciating them before they stopped waiting to be valued. Rain continued falling over Manhattan long after the wedding reception lost its music. Guests no longer crowded the ballroom center beneath the chandeliers. Small groups stood quietly near the windows or the bar speaking in softer voices than before, as though the entire night had become something far more serious than a celebration. Claire Whitmore stood near the hotel entrance beside Julian Cross, while staff moved carefully around them with lowered eyes and respectful distance. The city lights outside reflected across wet pavement like scattered gold beneath the storm. For the first time in years, Claire felt completely calm. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just peaceful. Julian glanced toward her gently. You could stay, he said. Most people in this room would rather hear you speak now than the bride and groom. Claire smiled faintly. That sounds exhausting. A quiet laugh escaped him then. It was the first genuine laugh she had heard all evening. Nearby, Rebecca Collins was speaking with two senior partners from another law firm who had quietly approached her after hearing about the mentorship program she managed. Earlier that night, Rebecca looked afraid to defend Claire publicly. Now people listened carefully whenever she spoke. One of the partners handed Rebecca a business card. "We need someone to oversee associate development at our Chicago office," he said sincerely. "Someone with integrity." Rebecca looked stunned. Her eyes instinctively found Claire across the lobby. Claire simply gave her an encouraging nod. Some rewards arrived quietly too. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Hale finally removed her engagement diamonds and placed them carefully inside her clutch purse before leaving through a private hallway without drawing attention to herself. She did not look angry anymore, just embarrassed. The kind of embarrassment that appeared when someone realized they had spent too long competing for admiration from people incapable of genuine love. Nate Mercer remained alone near the stage after most guests drifted elsewhere. The white roses behind him now looked strangely artificial beneath the dimming ballroom lights. His champagne glass sat untouched beside the microphone where he once tried to humiliate Claire publicly. He stared at it for a long time before finally walking slowly toward the hotel entrance. Every step seemed heavier than the last. Claire noticed immediately how different he looked now without the performance. No confident posture. No polished smile. Just a tired man standing inside the wreckage of his own arrogance. Nate stopped several feet in front of her. Rain tapped softly against the towering glass windows behind them while hotel staff pretended not to watch. For a few seconds, he could not speak at all. Then finally, quietly, he said, "I owe you an apology." Claire listened without interrupting. Nate lowered his eyes briefly. "Not because tonight went badly," he admitted. "Because I spent years treating your kindness like something ordinary." The honesty in his voice surprised even himself. "I thought ambition mattered more than compassion. I thought being admired mattered more than being understood." Claire remained calm, holding her coat gently against herself. Nate swallowed hard before continuing. "And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as part of my success story." The ballroom behind him had almost emptied now. Workers quietly collected glasses beneath fading golden light while distant thunder rolled over the city outside. Claire finally stepped closer. Not romantically, not emotionally, just humanely. "Then let tonight teach you something useful," she said softly. Nate looked at her carefully, waiting. Claire's voice remained gentle. "The people who love you quietly are usually the ones holding your life together." Nate nodded slowly, unable to argue with a single word. Julian opened the hotel door for Claire as cool, rain-scented air drifted softly into the lobby. Before stepping outside, Claire turned once more toward the ballroom, where table 17 still sat near the kitchen doors beneath harsh fluorescent light. Earlier that night, it had been the place reserved for the forgotten woman. Now it simply looked small. Rebecca approached quickly before Claire left and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," she whispered emotionally. Claire smiled warmly. "Just promise me you will keep helping people who cannot repay you yet." Rebecca nodded immediately. Then Claire stepped out beneath the Manhattan rain beside Julian Cross while the city lights shimmered across wet sidewalks and black umbrellas opened quietly around them. No photographers followed. No dramatic applause filled the air. Just peace. And that night, everyone inside the Astoria Crown Hotel finally understood that dignity becomes unforgettable the moment someone stops begging to have it recognized.